Thank you so much for the introduction, Lauren, and for entrusting me to moderate such an important conversation. And thank you to all of you out there who've taken time away from the duties of your remote workplace to join us today. As I was reflecting my notes from Tuesday's main stage sessions, I kept returning to the words of Ovi Moller, the former Atlanta Falcons fullback, who dedicated his voice and his resources to teaching young children about environmental issues. His challenge to all of us: look left, look right, ask who you are surrounding yourself with and engaging with, and make sure that you really consider issues of equity and access in your sustainability strategies. The two men joining me today have embedded the philosophy of both these things, of equity and inclusion and access, into their work. Mark Chambers serves as Director of Sustainability for New York City, where he leads policy and programs to confront climate change and inequality. He's an architect and an urbanist, and he is laser focused on creating a future where all New York City's 8.6 million residents can thrive and quickly transition to a zero carbon society. José Manuel Moller Dominguez is founder and CEO of Algramo. In the past 4 years, his company has bought and brought reusable packaging to 350,000 bottom of the pyramid customers in Santiago, Chile. Reuse rates in the communities served by Algramo have increased from less than 10% to 86%, and now he's bringing that model to New York City. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. Mark, I'd love to start with you. Single-use plastics and food waste factor prominently in New York City's circular economy vision, particularly for its own purchasing policies. Why those issues?
Well, thank you for having me here today. I think it's important for all of us to be looking at what we can do to be able to advance a lot of the components of circularity. For New York City, one of the things that we always keep in mind with our policy development is the fact that we are the largest city in the country, and those 8.5 million people, that scale means that the decision making that we do, that we implement, and the policies we push here doesn't just impact our city, but it allows us to de-risk work for a lot of other cities. So we definitely look at ourselves as a spear tip of a lot of efforts that cities all across the country and many cities globally can look to and can be able to use as a shield for a lot of the work that they're also doing. So when it comes to looking at our work around single-use plastics and our work around a lot of the other components of closed loop systems, we really believe that it is important for us to kind of put our effort and put our kind of money where our mouth is to that component. So it has become part of how we develop policies, and the fact that we can say, hey, we have the largest school system in the country. If we implement policies with that school system, then that means that we can actually give a little bit of freedom to other school systems to possibly consider that. We implemented a Meatless Mondays policy, for example, which has been done in other cities before, but when we do it here, it becomes the largest, and it allows for a lot more data where other cities can also impact that. So it's a driving force to use scale to be able to impact how we can not only benefit New Yorkers, but also do that for other cities as well.
Now, what role did equity and access play in the development of those strategies? Like, how did you go about that?
Sure. So keep in mind, New York City is not just the largest, but it's also one of the most diverse cities. And being able to realize that all of our policies don't start from ground zero. They don't start from a place where everyone has equal access or everyone has equal opportunity. And so being able to be cognizant of that allows for us to make sure that equity in the distribution of services is not just about making sure they're in all 5 boroughs of New York City. It's about making sure that we are looking at the data, looking and prioritizing what areas can most benefit from the health impacts of our policies, what areas are most impacted by some of the negative components of some of the large city life. I mean, I think nothing has been more clear than what's been happening over the city over the last several months in terms of responding to the national pandemic. How we look at the policy distribution and the outcomes matters. And so for us, we just believe that it's imperative to be able to use that kind of data-driven approach and be able to then micro-target some of our policies in neighborhoods, in boroughs, in places where they can impact places and impact populations that are most in need.
Right. So I want to delve more deeply into some of these things in a moment, but first I want to go to Jose and thank you for joining us from Chile. Jose, what role did concern for equity play in the development of Algramo's business model, and what stakeholders were included in the creation?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me here. I would start saying that equity is in the center of the region of Algramo. Actually, the idea of Algramo came out to try to solve a social problem first, and then we realized that this was really well linked with an environmental problem. The region of Algramo was and is still being trying to solve a problem that we call the poverty tax. And as the word says, this affects the poor people. They don't, when they don't have enough liquidity to get the largest packaging, they'll get the smallest one and they pay up to 40% more. So our region came out of realizing that problem, studying the supply chain and see how we could solve that. And to solve that, we realized that reuse could be a great solution. That's where everything gets linked. And we start working this in partnership with our neighborhood stores. In all Latin America, the mom and pop stores, the neighborhood stores, they are the heart of the community. And we start working with them to improve them, to help them to increase their range of impact and help them to be more competitive, offering this solution that helps the neighbors, the environment, but also their own business.
So what have you learned in the past year? Like, how has your model adjusted to reflect what you've learned too? I'm just curious, like things that you maybe had in mind at the beginning that you changed your philosophy about.
Yeah, from the beginning, something that we have that is really the years, it's the affordability of the solution. So this should be designed for everyone, not only the high income millennials, vegetarians like me. We are designing this for everyone that makes decision based on price. And today they have to decide between planet or their own pocket. And we want to disrupt that and to show that we could have something that could be affordable and sustainable at the same time. But another learning that we have from the beginning, it's give incentives for reusing. It's not only about the pricing per product, but also bringing back the packaging has to have enough incentive. Plus, I would say at the last and third part, it would be the collaboration. In the beginning, I was against the big corporation, the big brands, but then I realized that if we want to reach a global scale and to impact millions of users, we need to start collaborating. And they didn't teach me that in the university. I learned that on the field. They teach me how to compete, but not how to collaborate. And we learned that during this journey. And now we're using that tool to collaborate and to scale our impact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So actually, that's a great question for you too, Mark. I mean, he just was talking about the business collaboration and the role of businesses. So what role does the corporate world play in what you're trying to do? How do you include them, and what could they do to support your plans better?
Absolutely. I mean, they play a critical role. You know, I think that one of the ways in which we have to look at solutions is that everyone has a role to play in how we manage a society that is transforming, a society that is combating climate change, a society that is going to continue to deal with inaction if we're not more aggressive with it. So whether it's private sector or public sector, they have a huge everyone has a huge role to play. For us, we look at the ability to partner with private sector and how can we engage in a way that kind of designs and puts practice principles in place, and then lets the private sector use their flexibility to engage. We had a program that we engaged about 2 years ago to distribute reusable water bottles, for example, to every single New York City public high school student. So you think of distributing single-use, plastics on a regular basis versus doing reusable water bottles. There's millions and millions of reusable plastic water bottles that are avoided, in that process. We partnered with an entity called Swell, which produces these reusable bottles. And in 2 days, we distributed 320,000 of these water bottles to every public high school student. What it does is that it creates a legacy of action and activism. And what we were hoping to do is to say, this critical point in your life, when you are 17, 18, you're about to be going out in the world on your own. And we want to make sure that we are setting the tone, that the expectation is that they're going to carry that level of engagement around not just personal responsibility, but collective action, so that we can be able to move things forward. And that was based on the ability for us to partner with Swell and a private sector and public sector coming together.
Great, thank you. So Jose, what I know you've just moved. You're just announced your New York pilot this week. So, what's the ethnic makeup of the neighborhoods that you started with, and why were they chosen? How will what you're doing in New York City differ from Santiago?
Yeah, so as you were mentioning, yesterday we publicly announced our launch in New York. So I'm expecting that Mark will help us around that. We decide this specifically neighborhood to test and to first engage with the different variety of users that we have been seeing in New York. One side could be the immigrants, for example, the Latins. Also, we have the hipsters, the eco-friendly users. We're trying to mix everyone to show that this makes sense in different areas for different reasons, but it's a perfect solution between environment and social justice. So that's why we are keeping our name. It's a Spanish name. It's Algramo, means by the gram. But also we want to reflect that where we are coming from. It's not something that we are going to dress with someone else. We want to show, and we are proud of where we are coming from. And that's why we decided to start in Brooklyn first. And then we're going to expand in different areas of New York, understanding that could be, for example, somewhere in Manhattan, but also could be in Bronx or Queens, because this makes sense for different reasons, or social impact or environmental reasons. But we understand that this is the moment to replicate and to scale this kind of solution.
Great. So thank you to those of you who have been putting questions in the chat. And I just want to tell you, you should do more of those. I'm going to be peppering them into the conversation here. And I'm actually going to go to Mark with one of those questions. And it has to do with like the recovery. How do we, as we look at the COVID recovery, right? I asked about the last year with Jose, but we've obviously in the middle of this moment. How, as we look at this recovery, do we make the concepts that we develop democratic, and how do we empower local communities to take this moment, make changes from the bottom up rather than the top down? How can we empower them to be part of the solution here?
Well, I think it's important to think that this crisis, what we've been experiencing in the country, is not simply just the pandemic. We've also been undergoing a long overdue kind of racial reckoning that the city, that the country is really kind of dealing with. And I think that what we're seeing about these two responses is important. It's important to understand that it is not simply just about kind of personal behavior change and that being the only way to respond. It's about collective action. And so the legacy, I think, and what we want to encourage is looking at what is possible. Like we've seen that it's possible to confront a global pandemic in a city like New York that had an extremely heavy toll that paid towards this virus and come back into a very strong position with a much lower transmission rate. Like that is a huge part of, in part to people collectively acting together. Similar components go to how we look at the green recovery across the board. It's about everyone utilizing the power to organize, and for that organization to be the defining difference from before and after. Like it's going to be about collective action and about lots of individuals like coming together, finding like minds, and then holding everyone accountable in order for it to not be something in which the excessive use of plastics, for example, and PPE and single-use masks, which has been absolutely necessary during the response, will continue afterwards. We're going to have to hold everyone accountable to make sure that we're prioritizing better ways forward that will allow for us to not redo some of the mistakes of the past.
Jose, I see you nodding quite vociferously. What do you see? What you're doing as a job generation, as a way of creating jobs? Like how are we using this moment? How are you using this moment to move forward?
Totally, and this is how we could bring this solution to people, not only as a consumer, but also as a worker, as an employee. We are working actually currently with Unilever to explore some definitions around a micro franchise solution that could be like an Uber kind of, but with contract, with proper salaries and with what is involved with this contract, but also try to involve the community as the sales force of this. So it's driven by the community, sales by the community, and having the impact in the community. And of course, we have a focus on immigrants and people that sometimes they don't have all the opportunities to be part of this kind of solution. So we see a huge opportunity around this, only not in the impact on the packaging, on the pocket of the user, but also who is leading and bringing this solution to the consumer.
Right. So I have a couple more questions here before we wrap. The first one I've alluded to before, but I'm going to go back to it because I think it's super important. How can large companies help you make the systemic change, right? So you just mentioned Unilever, they're testing a new model with you. Jose, like what other things do you need from large corporations? What other ideas would you like to see as they come to collaborate with you? I'm going to come to you, Mark, too.
I would say two main things. The first one is to take this as a business line, not as a PR or marketing side thing. This is serious. This could be scaled. This could scale and is scaling actually here in Chile and will scale outside Chile. And secondly is to learn about collaboration. That's something that is easy to mention, but to understand that this change has to be made by different brands at the same moment. I like the Mark's perspective in terms of this should be a movement, not only from consumers, but also as a business to understand, okay, we are all in the same ship. We have this commitment to 2030 and the Paris Agreement goals, and we need to work together. And this means that maybe the one that in the beginning was your competitor now needs to be next to you, pushing in the same direction. Otherwise, we're gonna all fail. So I would recommend collaboration and also take this as a business line, not only as a PR side of marketing.
Mark.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Jose on that. We're not looking for optical allyship, right? So the time has come and gone for people to just kind of raise their hand and say that they support this too. You need to show it. You need to actually change your business models. You need to actually say that business as usual as it was before is not conducive to the future where all of us can thrive. Only 2% of packaging is in some form of closed loop system, 2%. So we need to really think differently about holding everyone accountable. That's myself included. So policymakers as well as manufacturers in the private sector need to no longer be using packaging that cannot be entered into a closed loop system. Like I think that time is come and gone, and we need to move forward and define what that is. And so when I get back to the idea of collective action, that means that we need to start holding everyone more accountable to that end and making sure that we're demanding that manufacturers take a look at the outcomes of them not acting and how that's impacting all the communities and the population that they're serving, and basically change those behaviors to make sure that it is something they're producing products that we can actually utilize in the future because we're around to utilize it, and it's not something that is continuing to source packaging from fossil fuels and oils to enable a single-use society. We have to do better, and we need to hold everyone accountable to that.
Right. Thank you. One last question for both of you. What cities, both inside and outside the United States, are inspiring to you as far as how they're addressing this issue, like circularity and equity simultaneously? And how are you sharing wisdom with those places? I'll go back to you, Jose, first.
Yeah, one city that inspires us as a company today, at least, is Amsterdam. They're taking this donut economy approach. That means showing that the problem is not only environmental, but also it's social. And they're providing tools, really concrete, how to solve this. They're addressing that, and that inspired us as an example of how a city could work together with a really clear roadmap of addressing both social and environmental problems.
And Mark, last word.
So one city that I'm actually following a lot right now is Milan, Italy, who has really done a lot to incorporate logistics into how they're dealing with surplus food items and being able to allow for a much more regenerative approach to that kind of closing that system. But I'll add an extra one in here, just a shout out to our northern neighbors in Canada, because they have been really active in moving on EPR, extended producer responsibility, which holds accountability towards manufacturers for the lifetime of the product use. I think that's definitely where we all need to be moving in order to really start to shift the economic value proposition of how things are produced, how they're used, and then how they are part of a reuse system in a closed loop.
Jose and Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your wisdom and all you're doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.